Imagine the worst moment of your life. Not the kind of bad day where you spill your coffee or miss a meeting. I mean the kind of moment where the ground opens beneath your feet, where everything you've worked for, everything you've promised, everything that holds your dignity together, collapses in an instant. Now imagine that moment happening in front of everyone you love, in front of your family, your neighbors, your entire community, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, you can do about it. That was the nightmare unfolding in a small village in Galilee over 2,000 years ago. A wedding was underway. Laughter was in the air. Music was playing. Families had traveled days on dusty roads to celebrate. And then, quietly, without warning, a disaster began to take shape. Not a fire, not a flood, not an attack. Something far more human. Something that would have rippled through this family's reputation for decades. The wine had run out. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, that doesn't sound so catastrophic, then you don't understand the world these people lived in. You don't understand what hospitality meant in first-century Jewish culture. You don't understand the shame that was about to consume this family. But someone else was at that wedding, someone who had barely begun his public ministry, someone whose identity was still a whisper, not yet a declaration, someone who sat at the table the same way you and I would, eating, listening, watching. And his mother leaned over and said 3 words that changed the course of history. They have no wine. What happened next is the story we are going to tell today. But I promise you, it is not the story you think you know. Because buried inside this miracle, beneath the surface of water jars and wedding feasts, is a story about a mother's fierce and impossible faith. A story about a son standing at the threshold of his own destiny. A story about the tension between what we want and what God is calling us toward. And a story about what happens when ordinary human shame meets extraordinary divine grace. If you've never cried over a wedding miracle before, you might today. Stay with me. To understand what happened in Cana, you first have to understand the world that surrounded it. Not the world of stained glass and church pews, but the real, breathing, dusty, sunburned world of first-century Galilee. Galilee was not the center of the Jewish world. That honor belonged to Jerusalem, the golden city to the south, home to the great temple, the priests, the Pharisees, the political power. Galilee, by contrast, was the countryside, the backwater, the province that Rome's bureaucrats occasionally forgot was even there. The people of Galilee were farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, and laborers. They woke before sunrise. They worked under a relentless Mediterranean sun. They knew the smell of fish and sawdust and fresh-baked bread. They paid taxes to Rome, taxes that never seemed to stop. And they went to the synagogue on the Sabbath and prayed for the day when God would send someone to restore Israel's dignity. Cana was one of those small Galilean villages. Scholars debate exactly where it stood. Some say near Nazareth, just a few miles to the north. Others argue for a location further west. But what we know with certainty is that it was small, close-knit, the kind of village where everyone knew everyone else's business, where reputation was everything, where your family name followed you for generations. In this world, a wedding was not just a party. It was a sacred event, a covenant sealed before God, family, and community. Jewish weddings in the first century could last for days, 7 days in many cases. The groom's family was responsible for providing hospitality for the entire celebration, and that meant food, and it especially meant wine. Wine in the ancient world was not simply a beverage. It was a symbol of joy, of blessing, of God's goodness overflowing into human life. The Psalms celebrated it. The prophets promised that in the days of God's redemption, the mountains would drip with sweet wine, and the hills would flow with it. To serve wine at a wedding was to participate in something sacred, to say to your guests, God is blessing this union, God is here with us. And to run out of wine, that was not a minor inconvenience. To run out of wine at your wedding feast was to fail in your most fundamental duty as host. It was a public humiliation, a dishonor to your family name. In a culture built on honor and shame, where your reputation in the community could determine your livelihood, your children's marriages, your standing in the synagogue, running out of wine was the kind of scandal that people talked about for years, decades even. So, when the wine began to run low in those stone jars, somewhere in the middle of this celebration in Cana, the steward of the feast would have felt the cold sweat of panic begin to rise. He would have sent servants quietly, desperately, trying to stretch what remained. And someone, or perhaps everyone, was beginning to understand that the unthinkable was happening. This feast was going to end in disgrace. Now let us talk about Mary, because before we can truly understand Jesus in this story, we need to understand her. And I mean really understand her, not the porcelain statue version, not the icon frozen in perpetual serenity, but the flesh and blood woman who carried more mystery inside her heart than perhaps any human being who ever lived. Mary of Nazareth was, by the time of this wedding, likely somewhere in her mid to late 40s. She had lived a life that most people cannot fully comprehend, a life marked by extraordinary grace and extraordinary suffering in equal measure. Think about what she had already carried. She had been a teenage girl in Nazareth when the angel appeared. She had said yes to something she couldn't fully understand, yes to a pregnancy that made no human sense, yes to a story that would make her neighbors whisper and her betrothed nearly abandon her. She had given birth in a stable, surrounded by animals, because there was no room anywhere else. She had fled with her infant son into Egypt in the middle of the night, a refugee mother running from a king who wanted her child dead. She had brought Jesus back to Nazareth and watched him grow, and she had always known, in that deep chamber of her heart that no one else could access, that he was different, that he was more than what the world could see. Simeon, the old prophet in the temple, had told her when Jesus was just 8 days old, "A sword will pierce your own soul." She had held those words inside for 30 years. She had watched him grow into a carpenter, skilled, quiet, thoughtful. She had watched him learn his father Joseph's trade, and she had prayed and waited and wondered when the moment would come, when the world would know what she had always known. And then, in the months before this wedding, something had shifted. Jesus had gone to the Jordan River to be baptized by his cousin John. Something extraordinary had happened there. Something Mary heard about in whispers that sent chills down her spine. The heavens had opened. A voice had spoken. And then Jesus had disappeared into the wilderness for 40 days. He had come back different, not changed in a way she could easily explain, still her son, still with the eyes she had memorized, still with the laugh she knew better than her own heartbeat, but carrying something, carrying a weight, carrying a readiness. He had begun to gather followers, young men who called him Rabbi, and now he was here at this wedding in Cana with those disciples nearby, reclining at the table, laughing and eating and celebrating. And Mary noticed the problem before almost anyone else did. She had a mother's eyes, the kind that miss nothing. She saw the servants' whispered conversations. She saw the anxious look on the steward's face. She calculated the wine remaining against the guests still celebrating. And she understood. She got up from her place at the table, walked to where her son was sitting, leaned close to him, and said the simplest, most loaded sentence she had ever spoken. They have no wine, just 4 words. But in those 4 words was a lifetime of faith, a mother's trust, a quiet but absolute conviction that her son, her remarkable, mysterious, impossible son, could do something about this. She wasn't commanding him. She wasn't demanding a public spectacle. She was doing what she had always done, bringing the need of the world to the one she believed could meet it. What happened next is one of the most fascinating, debated, and deeply human exchanges in all of Scripture. Jesus looked at his mother, and he said something that, in almost every modern English translation, sounds almost cold. "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." Now, before you recoil, before you think that Jesus was being dismissive or disrespectful, let's slow down, because this moment deserves far more than a quick read. The word he used, woman, was not an insult in first-century Galilean culture. It was a term of deep respect. It's the same word he would use decades later from the cross, dying, bleeding, broken, when he looked down and committed his mother into the care of his beloved disciple. In that moment of ultimate tenderness, he called her woman. So the word itself is not the issue. What Jesus was really saying was this: what is between you and me? My hour has not yet come. My hour. That phrase, hora in Greek, appears again and again in the Gospel of John. It is loaded with meaning. It doesn't just mean a moment in time. It means the appointed time, the divine moment, the axis point of history toward which everything is moving. Every reference to Jesus' hour in the Gospel of John ultimately points toward one thing: the cross, the crucifixion, the sacrifice that would change everything. So, in this gentle but profound exchange, Jesus was saying something enormous. Mother, the moment you're asking me to step into publicly, the moment of signs and wonders and revelation, that path leads somewhere. It leads to the hour I have been sent to fulfill. Are you asking me to begin that journey? Because once we start, we cannot stop. Once I step into who I am, publicly, in front of witnesses, everything changes. Are you ready for that, Mother? Are you sure? Scholars have written libraries about this single exchange. Some see it as a gentle rebuke. Others see it as a tender negotiation between a mother and son who understood each other perfectly. Others see it as Jesus testing his mother's faith, asking her to consider not just the miracle she was requesting, but the full weight of what that miracle would set in motion. But here's what I find most extraordinary about this moment. Mary heard everything he said. She understood the weight of it. She felt the trembling enormity of what she was asking, and she turned to the servants standing nearby. Not Jesus, but the servants. And she said the most trusting sentence she had ever spoken in her life. Do whatever he tells you. 6 words. The most powerful surrender of control in the gospel. She wasn't insisting. She wasn't pushing. She wasn't demanding that her son perform on her timeline. She was releasing him. She was saying, I trust you completely. Whatever you decide, I will follow. And so will they. She was stepping back, making room, and saying, the rest is yours. And something in that act of absolute open-handed faith moved the moment forward. Now the camera of our story shifts to 6 stone water jars standing near the entrance of the house. The Gospel of John is very specific about these jars. They were stone, not clay or ceramic, but stone. And this detail matters enormously. In Jewish purification law, stone vessels were considered immune to ritual impurity. Clay vessels could become unclean and would have to be destroyed. But stone was permanent, immovable, reliable. These were the vessels used for the ritual hand washing that was required before meals, the ceremonial cleansing that marked Jewish life as holy and set apart. Each jar held 20 to 30 gallons of water. 6 jars, 20 to 30 gallons each. That means there was somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of water available in that courtyard, the equivalent of nearly 700 bottles. Jesus looked at the servants who were hovering nearby, watching, uncertain. These were not disciples. These were not people of faith seeking a miracle. These were working people, hired hands at a wedding feast, who had just been told by the host's mother to listen to this young rabbi who was apparently going to solve the wine crisis somehow. They were probably skeptical. They were probably exchanging glances. What is he going to do? Why is he looking at the water jars? And then Jesus said, fill the jars with water. That was it. No elaborate prayer, no dramatic gesture, no mystical incantation. Just a simple, direct instruction. Fill the jars with water. Now think about what this required of those servants. Those jars were already there. Ritual purity jars for washing, not for drinking. Filling them with water was not the obvious solution to a wine shortage. It was a strange thing to do, and it would have taken real effort, hauling water from the well, jar after jar, filling each of these enormous stone vessels to the brim. The gospel says they filled them to the brim, not halfway, not mostly, all the way. Why does that matter? Because filling them to the brim meant there was no room for anything else to be added. No wine, no flavoring, no trick. If something was going to happen, it was going to happen in plain sight, with nothing hidden, nothing added, nothing manipulated. The servants obeyed. They filled the jars, every single one, to the brim. And then Jesus said, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. Draw it out. Carry it to the man in charge. The man who didn't know what had happened. The man who was responsible for the quality of every cup that was poured. Imagine being one of those servants in that moment. You are carrying a cup or a jar of what you filled from the well. You know what went into those stone vessels. Water. Just water. And now you are walking across the courtyard toward the steward of the feast. the man who will taste it, who will know immediately if something is wrong, who could have you reprimanded, who could make your life very difficult if you bring him something inappropriate. Your hands are shaking slightly. You don't understand what just happened. But the rabbi's mother told you to do whatever he said. And the rabbi said, take it to the steward. So you walk, step by step, with a cup of water, or whatever it is now, held in your trembling hands. And the steward raises it to his lips. The moment of transformation is not described in the gospel. John doesn't give us a flash of light, a rumble of thunder, a visible shimmer in the air as the water becomes wine. There is no special effect, no dramatic pause, no moment where the crowd gasps and the servants cry out. It simply happened. Somewhere between the stone jar and the steward's lips, the water became wine. And the steward, who had no idea what had happened, who didn't know there had been a crisis, who was simply doing his job, tasted it, and his eyes went wide. Not because something was wrong, because something was extraordinarily, impossibly right. He tasted the wine, and he stopped. He tasted it again. He turned it over on his tongue, the way a person does when they encounter something they cannot immediately explain. Something that exceeds their categories, their experience, their expectation. And then he called the bridegroom over. The bridegroom came, probably worried. Was there a problem? Had something gone wrong? And the steward looked at him with an expression caught somewhere between confusion and wonder, and he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now." The best. Not adequate wine, not passable wine. The best wine. The kind that guests would remember. The kind that would make a wedding feast unforgettable. The kind that would be talked about for years. Now, this bridegroom, we don't know his name, the Gospels don't tell us, must have been deeply confused. He knew what wine they had purchased. He knew the calculations his family had made. He knew they had run out. And now the steward was congratulating him on saving the finest wine for the end of the feast. He didn't understand. But someone else in that courtyard did. The servants. The ones who had hauled the water, who had filled the jars to the brim, who had carried the cup to the steward with shaking hands. They understood exactly what had happened. And somewhere in that crowd, quietly, a few other faces understood too. Mary, who had asked, and the disciples of Jesus, this ragged young group of followers who had barely begun to understand who they were walking with. The Gospel of John says this: "What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him." Not the crowd, not the whole wedding party, the disciples. This miracle was not a public spectacle. It was a quiet, personal revelation, shown to the few who had eyes to see. If you've ever felt like God was working in your life in ways no one else around you could see or understand, comment below and tell us your story. You are not alone in that experience. Now I want to take you deeper, because this miracle, the turning of water into wine at a wedding in Cana, is not just a feel-good story about a generous miracle at a party. It is one of the most theologically dense events in the entire Gospel of John. And once you see what John is doing here, you cannot unsee it. First, let's talk about location. Cana of Galilee. The beginning of Jesus' public ministry happens not in Jerusalem, the religious center, not in Rome, the political center, but at a wedding in a small town in the despised north. This is deliberate. This is John telling his readers something crucial from the very first sign. God does not operate from the corridors of power. God operates in the ordinary places of human life. In the villages, at the tables, among the people who have been told they don't matter. The miracle happens where real human life is happening. Not in a throne room, not in a temple, at a wedding, where love is being celebrated, where families are gathering, where joy is at stake. Second, let's talk about the stone jars again. These were ritual purification vessels, containers used to fulfill the requirements of Jewish law. They represented the old system, the system of rules and washing and external compliance. 6 of them, and the number 6 in Jewish numerology was the number of incompleteness. 6 days of creation before the Sabbath rest. 6 always reaching towards 7, the number of wholeness and perfection. And Jesus takes those 6 vessels of religious obligation, those containers of the old way, and he fills them completely, not with law, not with religious ritual, with wine, the symbol of joy, of blessing, of the overflowing abundance of God. He takes the containers of religious obligation and transforms what they hold into pure, overflowing joy. The old system had run dry, and the new thing, the thing Jesus brought, would not be poured into old wineskins. It would be something so new, so abundant, so gloriously unexpected that the people managing the old system wouldn't even understand where it came from. Third, let's talk about the timing. My hour has not yet come, Jesus said. But then he acted. He responded to his mother's faith. He moved before the appointed time, or at least before what he thought the appointed time might be. Why? Because faith moved him. Not the steward's request, not the bridegroom's panic. The quiet, absolute, surrendered faith of one woman who believed without demanding, who trusted without controlling, who simply said, "I know who you are. Whatever you decide, I accept." And that faith, the faith of a mother who had carried mystery in her heart for 30 years, unlocked something. It opened a door. It brought the miracle forward. This is the theological heartbeat of the story. Faith moves God. Not perfect faith, not loud faith, not faith that has all the answers and presents all the right arguments. Faith like Mary's, Kiamau, quiet, personal, humble, absolute. Do whatever he tells you. Let's go back to those young men, the disciples who had been following Jesus for only a short time when this wedding happened. The Gospel of John places this miracle very early in Jesus' ministry. At this point, Jesus had gathered only a handful of followers. Andrew, who had come from John the Baptist's circle, his brother Simon Peter, Philip, Nathanael, who had been under the fig tree when Philip found him, perhaps a few others. These men had left their fishing nets, their tax tables, their ordinary lives, because something in Jesus' eyes and words and presence had pulled them like a current pulls a boat from the shore. They couldn't fully explain it. They were still learning what it meant to follow this rabbi. They had heard him teach. They had walked the dusty roads with him. They had watched him interact with people with a directness and warmth and authority that was unlike anything they had encountered from the scribes and Pharisees. But they had not seen him do anything like this. And now, at this wedding in Cana, they watched everything unfold. They saw Mary lean over and speak to Jesus. They saw the exchange. They saw him turn his attention to the stone jars. They saw the servants filling the jars with water, which made no obvious sense. They saw a servant carry a cup to the steward. They saw the steward's face when he tasted it. And they understood. Something in their chests broke open in that moment. Something they could not have named. Some combination of awe and fear and joy, and the vertiginous realization that the man they were walking with was not just a teacher, not just a prophet, but something they didn't have adequate categories for yet. The gospel says his disciples believed in him. This is the point of the miracle. Not the wine, not the rescue of the wedding feast, not the preservation of the bridegroom's reputation. All of those things happened, and they were good and merciful and beautiful. But the purpose of the sign, John calls it a sign, not just a miracle because it points to something beyond itself. The purpose of the sign was to reveal Jesus' glory. Glory, in Hebrew, kavod, the weighty presence of God that filled the temple, that rested on the ark, that appeared to Moses in the burning bush. That glory, glimpsed in a quiet act of grace at a small-town wedding feast, in the transformation of 120 gallons of water into the finest wine anyone at that party had ever tasted. Glory, not in thunder and lightning, but in kindness. In the prevention of a family's shame, in the overflowing generosity that gave not just enough, but an extravagance, more wine than the party could possibly finish, better than anything they had expected. If this story is speaking to you, if you feel something stirring in your spirit right now, take a moment and subscribe to this channel. We have more stories like this one. Stories that don't just tell you about the Bible, but take you inside it. I want to return to Mary one more time because I think we haven't fully plumbed the depths of what she did in this story. Consider the risk she took. She approached her son at a public gathering and essentially asked him to intervene in a social crisis. She was asking him to do something that, as far as anyone in that room knew, no human being had the ability to do. If he had simply done nothing, if he had gently said, "Mother, I cannot," what would have happened? The wedding would have ended in embarrassment. That would have been painful, but survivable. But Mary's approach, her public implication that Jesus could somehow fix this, that put something fragile at stake. If she was wrong, if Jesus could not or would not act, she would have looked foolish. Her faith would have been publicly exposed and publicly disappointed. She took that risk anyway. Why? Because she had 30 years of evidence. She had 30 years of living with the mystery of this child. This son who had been announced by an angel, who had been visited by wise men from the east, who had been taken to Egypt to escape a king's murder decree, who at age 12 had sat in the temple teaching the scholars and said, "Did you not know I must be about my Father's business?" 30 years of watching him. 30 years of knowing that the ordinary face she kissed goodnight was connected to something that her mind could not fully contain. And now, at this wedding, with the wine running out and a family's dignity at stake, she did not reason through the theology. She did not calculate the odds. She did not consult the religious authorities. She simply went to her son. The way any mother with complete confidence in her child goes to them when something needs fixing. They have no whine, no demands, no manipulation, just a statement of need offered to the one she trusted absolutely. And here is the remarkable thing. After she gave her instruction to the servants, the gospel does not record her speaking again. She stepped back. She made room. She did not supervise. She did not hover. She said, "Do whatever he tells you," and then she let go. That is the model. That is what faith looks like in its purest form. You bring the need, you release the outcome. You trust the person, the God. You are bringing it to, and you step back and make room. Have you ever brought a desperate need to God and then struggled to let go of the outcome? I think most of us have. Comment below. Let's talk about what it means to truly trust. Let me tell you something that tends to get overlooked in this story. 120 to 180 gallons of wine. The wedding needed perhaps enough wine for the rest of the celebration. Maybe 20 or 30 more gallons, generously estimated. Jesus provided between 120 and 180. This is not an accident. This is not incidental. This is John putting a neon sign over the character of God. When Jesus acts, he doesn't just meet the need. He buries it in abundance. He doesn't trickle out barely enough to get by. He creates an overflow that cannot be explained by human calculation. This is the same God who, in the wilderness, didn't give the Israelites enough manna to survive. He gave them enough every day, never spoiling, always sufficient, never failing. This is the same God who told Abraham, "Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars," when Abraham had 0 children and his wife was 90 years old. This is the same God who, through the prophet Malachi, said, "Test me in this, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." The nature of divine generosity is abundance, overflowing, extravagant, more than enough, and not just more than enough, better than expected. You have saved the best until now. This is the theology of the miracle in miniature. What God brings into our lives is not just adequate. It is not just sufficient. It is the best. It is something that exceeds what we planned, what we arranged, what we purchased, and prepared ourselves. The steward thought the best had already been drunk. He thought the finest wine was gone, and from here on, it was going to be inferior. He had adjusted his expectations downward, the way so many of us do. The way we tell ourselves, "The best days are behind me. The best years of my life are over. I've already had my best chances, and I didn't make the most of them." And then Jesus served the best wine at the end. The best was not behind them. It was ahead of them. It was coming. It arrived when no one expected it, when the party was already past its peak, when the crisis was at its worst. That is the good news that this miracle carries. That is the message wrapped inside every jar of water turned to wine. The best is not necessarily behind you. Sometimes God saves it for exactly the moment when you've decided the finest part of your life has already been poured out. There is someone in this story we haven't talked about enough. The bridegroom. His name is never given. He appears only briefly at the moment the steward calls him over to marvel at the wine that has suddenly appeared. And then he disappears from the story again, back into his wedding celebration. He never knew what happened. He likely spent the rest of his wedding feast, perhaps the rest of his life, not understanding where that wine came from why the steward was so astonished, why the servants had such strange looks on their faces for the rest of the evening. A miracle was done in his name. A crisis was averted on his behalf. A shame was prevented, an honor preserved, a family's dignity protected, and he never knew who did it. He never knew that the quiet rabbi from Nazareth had transformed stone jars of water into the finest wine he would ever taste. He received the grace without knowing its source. How many times in our lives has that happened? How many times has a crisis been averted that we never even knew was approaching? How many times has a door closed that, had it stayed open, would have led us somewhere we would never have recovered from? How many times have we stood in the middle of a blessing and thought we were just lucky, just well organized, just riding the right wave of circumstances, not realizing that someone was working on our behalf? The bridegroom of Cana is a picture of all of us at our most human, living inside graces we don't recognize, receiving gifts we don't see, protected by love we cannot measure. But some of us in this story do see. The servants see, the disciples see, Mary sees. And seeing changes everything, because when you recognize the grace, when you understand who is doing it and why, it doesn't just fill your cup, it transforms your faith. John calls this miracle the beginning of signs, the first, the inaugural moment. And there is something profoundly intentional about the fact that Jesus chose to begin here, not with healing a leper in the temple courts, not with a dramatic exorcism in the synagogue, not with raising someone from the dead. He began by saving a wedding party from social embarrassment, by preventing a family's shame, by making wine, by bringing joy. What does this tell us about who Jesus is? It tells us that he cares about the ordinary things, the human things, the celebrations and the griefs and the small dignities that make up the texture of daily life. He is not only a God of earthquakes and sea crossings and dramatic interventions, he is also a God of wedding feasts and social crises and mothers who notice when the wine is running low. He is the kind of God who shows up to parties, the kind of God who wants your joy to be complete, the kind of God who sees the shame spiraling toward a family and moves quietly, without announcement, without demanding credit, to replace that shame with abundance. And here is perhaps the most astonishing thing of all. The only people who knew what happened were the servants, the disciples, and Mary. Not the steward, not the bridegroom, not the guests, not the town of Cana. Jesus performed his first miracle in front of the fewest possible witnesses. He did not use it to launch a public campaign. He did not stand up and announce what he had done. He did not let the moment become about him. He simply provided what was needed, and then he sat back down at the table and kept celebrating. That is the character of God, not performing for applause, not engineering moments of public admiration. Quietly, consistently, generously meeting the need, and then stepping back and letting the joy of the moment belong to the people he served. The servants deserve their own chapter in the story of Cana. These are anonymous people. We don't know their names, we don't know their backgrounds, we don't know whether they ever saw Jesus again after that evening. They appear for a brief moment and then vanish into history. But what they did matters enormously. They obeyed. When Mary said, "Do whatever he tells you," they could have refused. They could have argued. When Jesus told them to fill the purification jars with water, they could have pointed out, quite reasonably, that water was not going to solve the wine problem. They could have explained that their job was to serve guests, not to play along with whatever the rabbi's mother thought her son could do. They didn't. They filled the jars. They drew from them. They carried the cup to the steward. Obedience to an instruction that made no earthly sense. Trust extended to a stranger based only on one woman's confidence in her son. And they became the first human witnesses of the glory of Jesus Christ. They were not the disciples. They were not the priests. They were not the scholars of the law. They were working people, serving at a party, who simply did what they were told. And in doing so, they found themselves standing inside one of the most extraordinary moments in all of human history. This is the consistent pattern in the stories of Jesus. The fishermen who let down their nets one more time when every bit of experience told them it was useless. The man at the pool who picked up his mat and walked. The blind man who washed the mud from his eyes in the pool of Siloam. Ordinary people, simple instructions, inexplicable obedience, transforming results. The miracle always happens at the intersection of divine instruction and human obedience. Jesus tells you to fill the jars. You fill the jars, and then you find out what he can do with what you've given him. There's one more layer of this story I want to pull back before we reach the ending. The Gospel of John is not simply a historical record. It is a carefully constructed theological document in which every detail, every location, every number, every image carries symbolic weight. And the location of this miracle, Galilee, is deeply significant. The prophet Isaiah, writing 7 centuries before Jesus was born, said this about Galilee. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Galilee, the despised region, the place that the religious establishment of Jerusalem dismissed as too rural, too mixed, too far from the center of things to matter. The place Nathanael had mocked when Philip told him about Jesus. Can anything good come from Nazareth? This is where Jesus chose to begin, not Jerusalem, not the temple, not the seat of religious power, the despised place, the overlooked place, the place walking in darkness. And here in a small village in that looked down upon region, at a party, in the middle of a social crisis, the glory of God arrived. The great light dawned, not in the temple, not in the palace, not in the halls of power, but in the stone courtyard of a wedding feast, in the transformation of water in 6 ritual purification jars, in the first taste of wine that the steward didn't understand and the bridegroom didn't know he hadn't paid for. The light came to the dark places first. It always has. If this story is speaking to you, if you feel like you've been in a dark place and you're waiting for the light, please share this video with someone who needs it today. You never know whose storm this story might speak into. Jesus said, "My hour has not yet come." And then, in a kind of loving surrender to his mother's faith, he acted anyway. But he never forgot that phrase. It stayed with him. It accompanied him through every healing, every teaching, every confrontation with the Pharisees. It was the lodestone of his consciousness, the awareness that his life was moving toward a specific, appointed, irreversible moment. And eventually, years after Cana, years after the wine and the stone jars, and the servants with their trembling hands, the hour came. Not at a wedding feast, in a garden, on a hillside, on a cross. And the same hands that had quietly, invisibly transformed water into wine were stretched out and nailed to wooden beams. The same voice that had said, "Fill the jars with water," would cry out, "It is finished," as the sky went dark in the middle of the afternoon. The road from Cana to Calvary is longer than we sometimes realize, but it is a single road. The glory that was revealed in the transformation of water in stone jars, that same glory would be revealed in its fullest and most terrible and most beautiful form in the transformation of death into life, of sin into redemption, of abandonment into eternal belonging. The water became wine at Cana, and the wine would become something else entirely at the Last Supper, when Jesus took the cup and blessed it and said, "This is my blood, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." The circle closes. The sign points to what it always pointed to. The first miracle whispers the name of the last sacrifice. And the disciples who saw it, who watched the servants carry the cup and heard the steward's astonishment and felt the ground shift beneath their feet at a small wedding in Galilee, those disciples would carry that memory through everything that came after. The teaching and the healing and the arguing and the fear and the denial and the death and the resurrection and the upper room and the fire that came at Pentecost. They would remember Cana. They would remember that he had done it quietly, without announcement, because a mother believed, because servants obeyed, because 6 stone jars of water were willing to become something they were not created to be. And they would understand finally, fully, what kind of God they had walked with. So what do we do with this story? We are not standing in a courtyard in Cana. The wedding feast of that nameless bridegroom is 20 centuries in the past. The stone jars are archaeological artifacts, or memories, or dust. But the questions this story raises are living questions. They pulse with life right now, in this moment, wherever you are watching this. Is there an area of your life where the wine has run out? Where you started with such hope, such confidence, such joy, and somewhere along the way, it just ran dry? A marriage, a career, a faith, a dream, a relationship, a sense of purpose or direction. Something that once tasted like the finest wine and now feels like you're scraping the bottom of empty jars. Have you told him? Not the elaborate theological petition, not the perfectly worded prayer with all the right religious vocabulary, just the simple, human, honest statement of need. They have no wine. I have no strength. I have no joy. I have no idea what to do next. And then, this is the harder part. Can you do what Mary did? Can you turn to the servants of your life, the habits, the disciplines, the practices, the relationships, and say, do whatever he tells you? Can you fill the jars, even when filling them makes no obvious sense? Can you trust the instruction even when you can't see the outcome? Can you carry the cup to the steward even though your hands are shaking and you know what went into the jar and you have no idea what will come out? Because the promise of Cana, the theology wrapped inside those 120 gallons of extraordinary wine, is this: he does not run out. Human resources run out. Human hospitality runs out. Human strength and human courage and human endurance run out. The wine of our own making always, eventually, runs low. But what he brings is not subject to the same depletion, and he saves the best, not just enough, the best, not just adequate, extraordinary, not just survival, abundance. And not just in your past, in your future, in the next chapter, in the season you haven't entered yet, in the morning that hasn't arrived, in the turning that you cannot see coming, but that is already being prepared in stone jars that look like they only hold ritual water. You have saved the best until now. May that be the word spoken over your life. Not as a sentiment, not as a greeting card, but as a reality, tasted and confirmed, the way the steward tasted it and couldn't explain it, the way the disciples saw it and believed, the way the servants carried it and were forever changed by what they witnessed. You don't have to have it figured out. You don't have to understand how the water becomes wine. You just have to fill the jars. You just have to carry the cup. You just have to do whatever he tells you. The rest, the transformation, the abundance, the best wine saved for now, that part belongs to him, and he has never once failed to provide it. If this story moved you today, if somewhere in these words you heard something speaking to the dry and empty places in your life, don't let this moment pass without doing something with it. Comment below. Tell me what the wine running out looks like in your life right now. Tell me what jar you're being asked to fill, even though it makes no sense. Tell me where you're being called to trust, even when you can't see how. This community is a place where those stories belong. And if you believe that the best is not behind you, that God is not done writing your story, that there are still stone jars in your courtyard waiting to be filled, type Cana in the comments right now. Let's remind each other that we are not at the end of anything. Subscribe to this channel if you want to walk through more stories like this one, stories that don't just inform your mind, but reach into the chambers of your heart and do something there. Stories that remind you who God is, who you are, and why none of this struggle and longing and waiting is wasted. And share this video with someone who needs it today. You know who I mean. There's someone in your life whose wine has run out. Someone who feels like the feast is winding down. Someone who needs to hear that the best might still be coming. Send it to them, because that's what this channel is for. Not just content, not just information, but stories told carefully enough and lovingly enough that they do what stories have always done at their best. They find us in the dark. They sit down beside us and they say, "You are not forgotten. You are not finished." And the one who turned water into wine at a wedding in Cana is still in the business of making beautiful things out of ordinary vessels. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in the next story.